Tim, Marilyn, Judy. Good evening, church. Good evening. Have a good afternoon?
Wonderful.
All right. Good. Weather changed for the better, at least as far as I'm concerned, because I like the sun. But I'm glad you're here tonight. We start a new series tonight. Is the Bible unfair to women? God's holy word and radical feminism. Well, not necessarily radical feminism. We'll talk feminism. There's a lot of different kinds of feminism. Let me start out by asking you a question. When I say the word feminism, what jumps into your mind? What do you think?
Gloria Steinem.
What's that, Kathleen?
Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem, okay, yeah. All right, she made a name for herself. Am I making that noise?
We don't know.
Okay, they'll find it. What else? Oh, just turn me off. The noise went away.
Whenever I think of that, I think of incredibly stupid women.
Incredibly stupid women, okay. Feminism. God, I like that look, Greg. Feminism. What do you think of? What is feminism? Equality between men and women. That's a good definition, Ayla. I think a lot of feminists would say that that's all they're after. They just want to be treated fairly. They want to be, no? Well, they would say that, but there's probably more to it than that.
Yeah, that's not what they consider equality. They want to be exactly the same, and they're not.
There's a difference between equality and same equality, isn't there? The $50 word for that is egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is where you erase all differences, where you make no distinctions whatsoever between men and women. Anybody else? Feminism. That's probably a monitor, isn't it, Tim? Singing to us? No?
Tim may not hear
That's
it.
right. If you cannot hear this pitch, then you probably need to get your ears checked, okay? This is an ear test. Well, you got tinnitus. Okay? So do I, so it doesn't bother me. I sleep with it and everything. No big deal.
Greg said it's all too, but just me.
It what?
Greg said he
That's a different kind of ring, Greg.
Yeah. There's different words for that. Feminism. Now, you need to be aware that there are different kind of theologies in our world. There's black theology, there's liberation theology, there's Asian theology, there's just about any kind of theology you can think of, and there's feminist theology. Theology, of course, is just a fancy word for studying God. So what would be distinct about a feminist theology, do you think? What's that? Uh-oh, she's bringing up that submissive word. We were going to try to stay away from that. No, that's okay.
Hey! Yeah!
That's why he gets the big bucks. I think we'll double his salary. Feminism. Equal work for equal pay. Men are unnecessary. All men are suspects. There's different versions of feminism. Now I want you to open your Bible and join me in Genesis chapter 34. Genesis chapter 34. We studied this chapter on Sunday morning a couple of weeks ago, but we're going to do something a little bit different with it tonight. I want to reread this chapter and make just very few comments, just to remind you of a couple of things as we go along. But as I read it, especially if you've got a pen and a piece of paper, maybe you can take your outline and turn it over. I want us to think about what kind of women's issues there are in this chapter, what questions are raised, what answers maybe you see. But just jot down as we go along women's issues. We're just going to look specifically from that perspective as I read through it this time. Genesis 34. And starting in verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, that Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her, he took her and he violated her. That's the 1984 NIV. The 2011 NIV says he took her and he raped her. There is some discussion among scholars about whether or not this text is really saying that he raped her, because the Hebrew uses euphemistic terms for anything that's sexual, but there's very little chance that something other than rape is being talked about here. When you look at all the evidence in the rest of the chapter, almost certainly, 99.9%, this is a rape that we're dealing with, okay? Verse 3, his heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, get me this girl as my wife. Remember, in the ancient Near Eastern world, parents arranged marriages. So this isn't unusual for him to ask this favor. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he kept quiet about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Now Jacob's sons had come in from the fields as soon as they heard what had happened. They were filled with grief and fury because Shechem had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. And there's an example of a typical euphemism in Hebrew for sexual activity. They like to use the word lie. If a man lies with a woman, that's sexual activity. A thing that should not be done. Notice it says in Israel. And this is before the family had become a nation. But Jacob has been renamed Israel by now. Verse 8, but Hamor said to them, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us and give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask. Only give me the girl as my wife. It's a little bit of different tone between father and son here if you look at those. The son is a little more impatient. Now remember, in the ancient Near East, it wasn't unusual for money to change hands between families when there was a marriage, so that part's not out of bounds, but he does seem to be implying that he would pay more than normal because of the circumstances. Okay? Verse 13, because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father. They said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We will give you our consent. We will give you our consent under one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become as one people with you. Now remember, circumcision was given as a sign to Abraham that they are God's people. But almost certainly the Shechemites would have taken circumcision here as a marriage rite. Many ancient Near Eastern peoples used circumcision on young males just before they were married. And so they probably didn't think of this as a religious rite. Verse 17, but if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go. Verse 18, their proposal sounded good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man, who was the most honored of all his father's household, lost no time in doing what they said because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of the city to speak to their fellow townsmen. Remember, the gate is sort of the courthouse where legal stuff took place. Verse 21, these men are friendly toward us, they said. Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters. They can marry ours. But the men will consent to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let us give our consent to them, and they will settle among us. All the men who went out of the city gave agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Only now, by the way, do you notice that we find out that Dinah was where all this time? She was actually being held in Shechem's house. Verse 27. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. How many times have we heard that now? Have you noticed that that's been repeated? She's been defiled. She's been defiled. Sometimes by reading through the text faster, you notice some of these repetitions that are further apart. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. We're few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" And here is a stark ending. It's one of those narratives that just screeches to a halt in the Bible. We kind of wonder what happened next. This is one of those texts, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that really raises more questions than it does answers. But it's a text that has been fixed upon by feminist groups to raise certain charges against the Bible in terms of how it presents women. What issues do you see that are raised in this text that are women's issues that might raise some questions about how the Bible deals with women? Okay, it doesn't look like she has a right to choose her husband. Is that what you said? All right. She was defended by her family. A little bit of overkill, but they defended her.
She was defended as a possession, not because she was defiled, because the family was shamed for that defile.
So are you saying that they didn't think that she was shamed? Family shamed only?
I don't think it mattered as much. I mean, because it looked poorly on them as a family, because it shamed the whole family.
Okay?
Basically used her, didn't they, to get what they wanted, annihilate them.
Yeah, and why didn't they just go take her? If it really mattered, why didn't they just go get her right in? So we asked.
Okay. What is, do you think she's being treated as property? Okay. There was something else. What did you say, Sabrina? Okay, a little bit of disagreement here. So you think they were defending her, and then over here we're saying maybe they were just defending their own honor. Okay. What else do you see?
I've written that women, were not in control of their own bodies, like property, like everybody else.
Okay, so that's being treated as a possession, as property again.
And how did he find out about what had happened with her? I wish the text would.
It's an unanswered question. How did Jacob find out? We don't know. We don't know how Jacob found out. I suspect it was a lot like Camden. It's a small town, and things don't stay secret very long.
Well, she didn't come home. If she's still at Shepard's house, when
That's
they-
true. She didn't come home, and somebody would wonder, where's Dinah? She didn't come home today. And we don't know what the time frame is here. What? We don't know what the time frame is. This may have all happened in a period of a week or a month. When they went out to work in the fields, they didn't go out and come back every day necessarily. They could go out and stay with the flock for days on end. So there's no way to tell what the time frame is here, but it doesn't change the way we think about the story. those questions were just not important to the narrator, so they're left out. If you answer all the questions, then you lose the story. You have to remember, the narrator chooses what details to put in the story. And who's the narrator? God. For the Bible. When we're reading the Bible, the narrator is God. He's making the narratorial choices, if you will. He's choosing, he's being selective about what to put in the story and what to leave out. And if he leaves something out, then we have to honor that. A lot of times Bible teaching puts things back in that God left out and makes certain points, theological points better. We're probably all guilty of doing it from time to time. But we need to discipline ourselves and say, God left that out for a reason. It isn't, we need to look at what he actually put in. What else do you see? The honor, was it just the families? Did they not care about her? Did she have any choice at all in marriage? Was she just being treated as property? Do you see anything else? Ayla?
Well, I mean, she was going to go visit the government and basically develop her and then go back to her.
It's a bizarre kind of story. Most people who study this will point out that the characters in this story are complex. They're not simple characters. They're real characters. Everyone in this story has some good and some bad. You may not think there's a whole lot of good to Hamor, for instance. But remember, we asked the question, was Hamor trying to do the right thing? Even if you want to cast Hamor as all bad, you at least have to ask the question, was he at least trying to make up and do the right thing? He may have done it in the wrong manner, but at least he was willing to go out and say, I'll marry the girl. Don?
One thing too is the family actually went and got her back, and if a piece of property is no longer valuable, why bother the other?
Okay, so if she is a piece of property, which I know no person at all wants to be thought of as a piece of property, Don's at least saying she's considered to be a valuable piece of property, right? But she's their piece of property? Okay.
Interesting. If he loved her, if he really loved her, then why would he take her by force?
Well, the way that it's presented is that he raped her and then realized that she was more than just a sexual object to him, that he actually had authentic feelings for her, and now he's having to back up and try to redo the relationship, redefine the relationship. Whew, there's a lot there, isn't there? You know, if you start a relationship bad, it's hard to get it back where it needs to be. It would be better just to do it right from the very beginning, right? So maybe there's a lesson just in that much of it. This is a text that has been interpreted different ways for the last 2,000 plus years. Because remember, this is part of the Old Testament, part of Genesis, so this is a text that had been studied even before Jesus came by the rabbis. And one of the interpretations that you run into is that some interpreters blame Dinah for everything that happens. Now, how could you do that? Just look at the story, look at the beginning of the story. How could you come to that? Anybody?
Well, now, am I thinking right when I say that they're not supposed to be unattended?
That's a question that a lot of people raise. And in more traditional cultures, and the people who would translate it this way or interpret it this way would have been from more ancient cultures. This is where we have to think about the difference between our culture and their culture. Is it true that in these smaller, more traditional cultures that women just didn't do things like that? They just, you know, for a woman to go out like that into town Dakota just wouldn't be done, okay? And so is she to blame for all of this?
Well, I wouldn't say she's to blame, but what I'm saying is you could find fault in her actions. She put herself in a bad situation or a bad position.
At least,
Right.
okay?
I mean, I'm not going to walk down from Camden at midnight.
Okay. I'm glad. Hey, I learned the hard way when I was a kid that there were certain places in Dallas that I didn't need to be after the sun went down. Okay? And if I'm going to go there and somebody hurts me, well, they still need to pay the price, but somebody needs to tell me you shouldn't have been there. Right? So, at the very least, Dinah was unwise. The question is, was she promiscuous? Did she go out looking for a sexual relationship? Some people say that she did. I have a hard time seeing that in this text.
Yes, why call it rape?
That's exactly right. But they would say that it's not rape.
But didn't they get that outside of marriage at that time?
Outside marriage? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Jordan.
Like, when she had sexual contact with that before they got married or whatever?
Oh, no, I don't think so. No, that's something we do now, unfortunately.
My commentary said that she was about 14 years of age. Does that have anything to do with it?
What's that, Kathleen?
My commentary said she was about 14.
It's impossible to know how old she is.
Well,
It's
they're going
impossible.
by Joseph's age.
Yeah, she probably was a young girl because they got married pretty young, and if she's still single, which she is, then she probably was 14, 15, 16. But there could have been extenuating circumstances, and for some reason she hadn't married when she was 22. There's just no way for us to know that. That's an educated guess.
And two, was she the only daughter that Jacob had?
She's the only daughter that we have listed that Jacob had. That's the others were the 12 sons, and it seems like she's the only daughter that he had. What else did you notice about Dinah in this text? There's something glaring here that none of you have mentioned, that feminists are quick to jump onto.
She's labeled as a daughter or sister or...
Very good, Amy, very good. And that's not what I was asking for, because that's a little later. You must be looking over my shoulder down here in my notes.
No, I mean, it's just, like, her identity is tied to...
Feminists mention that her identity is, she's always somebody's sister, somebody's daughter. Let's come back to that, but that's good. I'm thinking of something else. You're missing it. When I tell you, you're going to go, oh, yeah.
Why is she still at his home?
Why is she what?
Still at his home?
At this home?
Yeah.
That's an unanswered question. How could we find out, maybe?
But it does, as far as looking at it from the feminist perspective, it does beg the question, did she want to stay?
And how come we don't know that?
Because she didn't speak up.
That's exactly right. Her voice is silent through this whole text.
She was looking for a vote.
Her voice is silent. It says she went, what does it say? She went to do what?
Visit the daughter.
Okay, you have to take that at face value, all right? She wanted to go see what the other women that in town were like.
But now, the city that she was in, that's the city gate, that's not their city, no, that's not their land.
No, it's not. They were living outside of the
So
city.
she went into the city to visit other.
That's exactly right. Jacob and his family were living outside the city. They were outsiders. That's why a lot of this negotiation was for them to become insiders. If the negotiation had gone through, then they would have begun to intermarry with this group, and they would be considered insiders. They would have been able to purchase property. And so the negotiations tell us that they couldn't intermarry, they couldn't purchase property. They were outsiders.
So what I'm saying is, why would she go to a city that she doesn't belong, that her people are not there, to visit somebody?
We don't know. Because, what, Susan?
She didn't speak up.
She doesn't get a chance to tell us.
Necessarily say it's the city either, does it, since she went out into the land, it was not where women were harvesting or working or reaping stuff, you know, like when Ruth went on Boaz's land, gleaned behind.
Now, you hang on to that story, because that's a good story. We need to remember that. Y'all remember Ruth and Boaz tonight, all right? Naomi and Ruth and Boaz. But let's write something down. Here's the first thing that feminists notice in this text. Number one, why does the narrator deny Dinah a voice? Why does the narrator deny Dinah a voice? She never says a single word. Obviously, she would have spoken. It's just that whatever she said is unreported. Now let's ask ourselves a question. Does that mean that the narrator is trying to tell us that Dinah is wrong? Does that mean that the narrator is blaming Dinah by not giving her a voice? Okay, Ayla says maybe that's just the way they did in that time, that women didn't have a voice and men got to speak, whatever.
It was going to be, her voice was really going to be irrelevant because the men were going to react the way their culture
Okay, so culturally, her voice is irrelevant, and that's why the narrator left it out. God.
It might be.
Yeah, it's possible. It's a possible answer.
Wonder if she was a woman that was just a little bit more furious or a little bit braver than other women. I mean, there had to be women back then that were a little different from others.
Let's go back for a minute. I thank you for reminding me of that, Marie.
I mean, I go to Adams Street on nighttime.
That's exactly right.
Telling people that you're scared. I'm not scared of anything. I go down there to my building at night. I don't think anything about it, and people tell me I'm crazy. I don't care. I'm not worried about it.
Some people say that Dinah was at fault because she went out on her own. Can we think of any other example where a woman goes out on her own in the Bible? Okay, Ruth and Boaz. Ruth went out after Boaz.
Didn't Mary go to Elizabeth's by
Naomi told her to go out.
Didn't Mary go to see Elizabeth by herself?
Mary apparently went, we don't know for sure, but it seems like she was by herself. Here's one in Genesis that we've already come across, is Rebecca went out to draw water by herself. Remember, and Abraham's servant found her, and she ended up being Isaac's wife. So I don't think we can say automatically that Dinah was wrong for going out by herself. If that were true, then the narrator of Genesis would be consistent, I believe. And anytime a woman goes out by herself, he would have said, no, that's wrong. Now, in this particular instance, for Dinah to go out as an outsider into Shechem, maybe that wasn't to blame Dinah for what happened. Don?
It might seem.
Men weren't doing their job. And some people have brought that up. Why didn't Jacob keep her in? And that's a valid question, because we have to ask ourselves about how Jacob handled himself in this narrative. We did that a couple of weeks ago, but we'll come back to that. One thing that is glaringly true in this text is that the narrator never blames Dinah for what happened. The narrator just simply says that she went out, here's what happened, and after that, every time that the act is brought up, it is characterized as what? She was defiled. She was defiled. A bad thing was done in Israel that shouldn't be done. Never is she impugned by the narrator. And that itself should tell us that the narrator probably doesn't see Dinah as being at fault here. Maybe unwise, we don't know, but definitely not wrong. Not the one who caused, so to speak, all of these things. In verse 7, it says, Shechem has done a disgraceful thing in Israel. It never says that Dinah has done a disgraceful thing, a thing that should not be done. In verse 13, it says, Dinah had been defiled. She's not a co-conspirator. It's something that happened to her. Verse 27, the city where their sister had been defiled. Verse 31, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? They didn't ask, should our sister have been out there acting like a prostitute? No. So she's never impugned by the narrative or the narrator. Talking about Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, remember that Naomi did give Ruth some pretty good advice. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, you remember? When she was going to go out and glean in the field, she said what? Be careful to do what? She said, it would be good for you, my daughter, to go with the girls. Moms, have you ever said, stay with the other boys? Right? I mean, Karen's laughing because I know I've heard her say that before. I've said it. That's basically what she's saying here. Stay with the group. Stay with the group, because if you don't, what happens? Bad things can happen. So you stay with the group. And Naomi gave Ruth good advice. She said, stay with Ruth, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So is it right for us to tell our, especially our young women, be careful where you go? Be careful who you find yourself with? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, is the Bible unfair to women? If a woman is raped and the Bible doesn't give her a voice, is the Bible then not giving women a fair voice who have suffered violence at the hand of a man? Can you think of an example that would tear that down? Anybody? Okay, I'll give it to you. Put your finger there and go to 2 Samuel, verse 13. Excuse me, chapter 13. 2 Samuel 13, let's read a little bit of this together. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. These are all half-brothers and sisters, okay? Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shemiah. Watch out for those friends. They'll give you bad advice. David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said, "and when your father comes to you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare me food in my sight so that I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and he pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so I may eat from her hand." David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. And she took in the pan and served the bread to him, but he refused to eat. "Send everyone out of here," Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and he said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." "Don't, my brother," she said to him. "Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he'd loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you've already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and he said, "Get this woman out of here," and bolt the door after her. Now, what do you notice right away that's very, very different about this text?
I think he hated her. He hated her afterwards instead of being in love with
Okay,
her.
that's different.
I think he hated her because she was a weakness to him.
Could be. What else do you notice is exceedingly different about this text? Tamar is one of the main speakers in this text. We find out, if we want to know what a woman in Israel thinks about rape, here we have it. So, for a feminist to go to Genesis chapter 34 and say that the Bible is unfair to women because Dinah doesn't get to say what she thinks about rape, what would we say to that? Wrong. Wrong. If we want to know what Dinah thought about rape, then we can just go over and read what Tamar said. And we can't just automatically transfer it over, but we get an idea of what somebody in Israel would think about rape. And you can't make the case that women are not given a voice when they're abused by men, because Tamar gets a big voice here. We find out exactly what she thought about all of this. So why doesn't Dinah have a voice in Genesis 34, but Tamar has a voice in Samuel?
She's probably not too strong to speak out.
Good answer, Jordan, but that's not right.
Well, the Word of God is, the narrator was Spirit-led in what they wrote. We were supposed to get different things out of each situation.
Gold star for theology to Candy for tonight. The narrative here is meant to make a certain point. The narrative isn't written to give Dinah a voice or anybody else. The narrative is written to make a point that God wants to make, the narrator. And if he needs Dinah to speak to make that point, she will speak. If he doesn't, she won't. It doesn't mean that she didn't speak. It just means that what she said was not important to the point that's being made in this particular text. Exactly right. Let's write that down on your outline. Biblical narratives are written to reveal God's person, and plan not to provide a platform for gender politics. So when any groups, I don't care if it's feminist theologians or liberation theologians or black theologians or Hispanic theologians or, left-foot theologians, it doesn't matter what it is. Any group that goes to the Bible and expects the narrator, God, to act the way they think he should act, man, that's wrong. God didn't write the Bible to fit into the categories of any of these theologies that have come up over the last 1,000 some odd years. God is making a point. And there's two things that God is always doing in the Bible. What are they? He's trying to reveal what? Who he is. He wants us to know who he is. His person. And the second thing he's trying to reveal is what? It's right there in front of you. What he's doing. His agenda. Who is God and what's he up to? Those are the questions that the Bible is answering constantly. Every text you read in the Bible, you ask yourself, what does this text tell me about who God is? And number two, what does this text tell me about what God is doing? And then thirdly, how do I need to respond to it as well? But so we have to, if we really want to understand the story of the rape of Dinah, then we're going to have to at some point ask ourselves, what does this text tell us about who God is? And that's a tough question because God's never mentioned. And secondly, what does it tell us about God's agenda? Some texts are more difficult than others. Now, if we had a radical feminist here tonight, she were listening to our teaching, she'd say, well, okay, that's fine, Brother Richard, but it's still true, isn't it, that the Bible has ramifications for how we see women and how we think about women. And feminists aren't real happy with the way women are presented in some of these texts. So we have to keep going a little bit further. Let's write something else down. Or let's look at one other thing real quick before we finish up tonight. Verse 12. Shechem says, make the price for the bride and the gift I'm to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask me. Only give me the girl as my wife. Now, you said this a minute ago. This text seems to portray women as what? As property. Okay? And it sounds like there's a negotiation going on here that sounds as if he's trying to buy a piece of property, at least to us. And Shechem, of course, he's got a lot of problems. His biggest problem in this negotiation is that he never does what? He never apologizes. He never admits to doing anything wrong. Of course, his daddy is the mayor of the city, or whatever they call him, and so he might have been one of those that was a little spoiled. He comes across that way just a bit. The brothers in verse 15, we'll give consent to you on one condition only, that you become like one of us, etc., etc. So it sounds like they also are doing what? Sounds like both sets of men are making this negotiation for Dinah. The other thing that's troubling about Hamor that he never does to his son Shechem is he never does what? He never disciplines him. He never says, son, what have you done? We'll try to make this right, but you made a mistake. Apparently, he just thinks that everything is going along really, really good. So here's the second question. Let's write it down. Is Dinah treated as a possession instead of a person? Is Dinah treated as a possession?
No, because she was revenged.
Well, I don't think we're going to agree. I think I'm going to find both sides in here. All right? But let's talk about it for just a moment. Look at the brother's concern in verse 14 for a second. We can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. Who is us? Is it just the man in the family? Or is it the whole family? If it's just the men in the family, then that would seem to indicate that they thought of her maybe as a piece of property, as a possession. But what if when they said it's a disgrace to us, they meant their whole family, including Dinah. Would that mitigate the idea that they thought of her as a piece of property?
I still think it was all about their genetic.
All about what?
All about the family being shamed like that. Because women had little or no value at that time.
Hamor thought she was worth a lot.
And, you know, Jacob thought women were worth a lot too, because look what he did.
He worked 14 years for Rachel.
But for the one woman that he was in love with, Hamer for the one woman that he was in love with, but what I read is, these men had value, or placed value on one particular woman, but not women as a whole. He didn't love Leah, he didn't want Leah, she was the other one.
But he didn't cast her out.
No, she was the one that got married.
Do women today, I want to use the word flaunt, but maybe that would be too inflammatory. Do women today take lots of pride in their wedding rings?
Yes, they do.
Is that diamond in some sort of way an economic measure of what a man thinks of you?
No, absolutely not.
You don't think so?
No, in some cases, I believe this world, yes.
You think so, David?
Well,
We got a battle now.
No, it shouldn't be. It is. Women, young women today see it that way, but it should not be that way. So, and like, I don't see it that way for my part, but I know a lot of young girls who do see it.
Judy? Is she happy with that? Okay.
Well, I think that's your economic standard in your,
Well, do you get the point that I'm making, though, here? That there are economic measurements in our culture that are meant to reflect on the value of a woman. Maybe our culture isn't as different from their culture as we would like to think that it is. I'm going to suggest to you, as we go through this teaching, that women had more power in that culture than it appears at first sight that they had. And I think I can prove that to you. What's that?
Jacob's mother, she had a lot of power.
Absolutely. And, oh, you bet. She ran that household. And she did it in a way that Jacob thought, or that Isaac thought he did. Rebecca ran the household, and she did it so well that Isaac thought he was in charge. Look, oh, you ought to see the looks on the faces of the women right
What
now.
you're saying is ain't nothing changed. Is that what we're going in though? Ain't nothing changed.
I think what their looks is telling me is move on to the next point now, because we don't want to talk about that. Yes, ma'am. So Dinah's worth an entire town? You could look at it that way. Now, well, I'll tell you that. Let's finish this one up, okay? Somebody mentioned the book of Ruth, I think it was Steve. All the examples in the Bible are not good examples, are they? Think back to the relationship between Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Remember, Naomi and her husband have to leave the country because things are so bad. And while they're in Moab, her husband and her two sons die. And it's just Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, and she tells the daughters-in-law, just you stay here, I'm going to go home. God has destroyed my life. For some reason, he's against me. One of them stays, the other one comes, and of course, that's Ruth. They come back home, they're poor, and all they can do is glean. That was welfare, so she had to go out and get a welfare check, right? She had to go out into the fields, glean the fields. And Naomi sees Boaz and realizes that Boaz could be the kinsman redeemer. And so she makes sure that Boaz and Ruth meet each other, and they fall in love with each other and have a child, which turns out to be either what is the grandfather or great-grandfather of King David, and the story continues on. So what we have here is a more positive view of how men viewed women. But another thing about this story, stop and think for just a minute about the story that I just told you. It is told through the perspective of whom? Absolutely. So if we were to take the book of Ruth and say, here's an example of how God sees culture, we could make the case that God sees culture through women's eyes, not men's. Because that whole story is told through the eyes of the women. Maybe it's not fair to make too many conclusions just based on Genesis 34. What do you think? And when we look at Boaz, we see a man. What do we think about Boaz? Did he see Ruth as a piece of property? I don't think so. I think he saw Ruth as someone that he was to protect, not to possess. Ladies, does it bother you to think that a man is supposed to protect you? Is that demeaning?
No.
Feminists would say that it is. I don't need to be protected. Don't open the door for me. Is that biblical femininity? I missed that, but that's okay. Let's finish up with this sentence tonight, and then we'll come back next week, God willing. God expects men to protect women, not to possess them. Whether or not Jacob and his brothers saw Dinah as a piece of property, that's not what the Bible presents. If they did, they were wrong. They were out of step. Well, we'll look some more at it. Get this text out and write down some other things that you see. But y'all were very insightful tonight. You saw most of the things that feminists raised, questions, and we'll finish looking at it later. I hope you'll all stay with us tonight. We're going to run down the hall to the fellowship hall and have some pizza and snacks and enjoy the game, hopefully for a little while.